We've talked a little bit about the qualities and the characteristics of bureaucracies, including the ideas of division of labor, and there's a hierarchical authority, and that there's rules, set rules and regulations, that written communications are necessary, and there is a rule of impersonality. Let's talk a little bit for a moment about the problems that we get from bureaucracies. And of course, I mean, obviously there's going to have to be problems because people are not 100% efficient or rational. So these rational organizations are 100% efficient. They're made up of people, and people don't work that way. So let's sort of talk about something that, you know, why it doesn't, they're not quite the best situations to necessarily work with. And because the people are not 100% efficient or rational, then we know that there's going to have to be other lines of communications besides the ones that are dictated by the organizational rules. So there are informal lines of communications, and of course that in itself is going to upset the formal structure. If you've ever been in any sort of organization, you know that there are conversations going around which are not official communications, discussions by the water cooler, or politics in the organization. I'm sure that all of you have experienced things like that. So that's probably number one. It doesn't encompass the whole plethora of diversity of types of human communications are not within that dictated structure. Now, if you want to keep that structure, if you want to talk about that structure and as it is, and they're going to, and it was to be so efficient, well, you see this, that it itself is rigid, and the rigidity itself breeds inefficiency, because things don't always go according to the rules. There always have to be exceptions to the rules, and when there is when the rules have to be adhered to, there's a lack of flexibility. There's a lack of flexibility, and that lack of flexibility will make the organization less efficient in of itself. There are many organizations that see this inefficiency, and they say, let's make it more efficient. So we'll put in more rules, and it actually becomes more rigid or more less flexible. This is particularly true of like, for instance, of very large organizations or governments, but governments is also questioned, by the way, of those people who are in the government maybe are seeking more power also, because more rules makes more power. Excuse me, I'll just close the door here for a minute. Now, the third problem is that there is an idea of goal displacement, which means that when the rules are considered important, there will be people who will emphasize adherence to the goals more, adherence to the rules rather than adherence to the goals. In other words, there's a rule in place; it has to be adhered to, even if it's not going to achieve the role of the role of the organization. But that's the rule, so you have to work on it. And the goal gets displaced by the rule, and so that goal becomes. So the rule becomes more important than the survival of the organization itself, and within that you find that there's people who develop a bureaucratic personality, and those are the people actually who decide that the rules are more important. A bureaucrat who will actually find that allows such a thing to happen because that all the people have not been notified of the changes which propose, so therefore we have to not continue in achieving the goals in some way or another. Furthermore, you have a situation where there will be a resistance to change because of the organization itself, because as it resists, the organization grows, and the people, it's really just people who are working in this organization, and these people want to keep their positions, but the situation has actually changed. The organization has a life of its own. It is not really the people, although the people need it. Now the people want to keep their jobs, want to keep their positions. Now if they want to keep the positions and the organization has changed, then they need to actually learn more and new skills in order to adapt to change, adapt to new changes, and adapt to the changes coming out from without. And so what happens is that there are people who realize this, subconsciously or consciously, irrelevant, but they realize this and they do not want to change, because if there was a change, they might wind up inefficient in their job or in their position, and they might have to move or change a position. So there is a resistance to change within the organization itself. And what happens is, as these organizations get larger and larger and larger, there's another, and particularly huge organizations, including countries, they not only become resistant to change, but they become ruled by a very small amount of people. That's the idea of an oligarchy. An oligarchy means that there's a small amount of people who actually control the whole organization. And it could be a very large organization, like a huge corporation, or it could be a military organization, it could be a country itself. And when you find then in these huge organizations that you have a small amount of people making hugely important decisions for everybody else, and they're not necessarily taking everybody else into account when they make these these decisions, and they can even be life and death decisions, or decisions which affect the health of thousands or even millions of people. And this is the iron law of oligarchy, which was formulated by a political analyst in 1962, Robert Michels. And so these then are the characteristic problems that we have with the bureaucratic organizations, which are so prevalent in modern life. Let's go over them again. Because people are not completely rational, we find that, and so there is not efficient, so there is an informal lines of communications which cannot be watched. There is a rigidity and inefficiency. There is and then there is a possibility for goal displacement when the goals are replaced by the rules. Is the development of a bureaucratic personality. There is and there becomes a resistance to change by the organizations, by the people in the organizations, and that the bureaucracies will be ruled by a small number of people, which is called an oligarchy.